Before we get started, just a reminder that you can find all of my available rental properties on my website at marcguzman.com. If you own investment property, click on the Owner Services section to see our complete list of services. Thank you to our sponsor for today's episode, East Brother Beer. Located on Canal Boulevard in Point Richmond, East Brother Beer mixes classic brewing styles with precision and modern sensibility to create the perfect Bay Area craft beer. When I started this podcast, I wanted to feature all the people and businesses that make the Bay Area a great place to live, while showcasing aspects of the community that you might not be aware of. My guest today is Otis Taylor Jr. of the San Francisco Chronicle. Otis does for the Chronicle something similar to what I do with my podcast. Feature the East Bay's most interesting and amazing people and how they make the Bay Area one of the best places to live in the country. Today, Otis and I talk about an issue that is very pressing in today's Bay Area, the current homeless crisis and the challenges homeless face, as well as solutions to help remedy the problem.
I did this one, I guess it was pre-podcast, but it was a video. These guys called their show Drinking in the Morning. This was years ago. But the whole purpose was how I thought they were, the cups were just for show. Mm-hmm. The whole purpose of it, they would just get trashed on a Sunday morning and interview people. But my show, we did like a shot or two before and we're like sipping some drinks. And then they're like, so what are you going to interview us about today? So they flipped it and made me the interviewer. It was so slick. I was like, nicely played, guys. But yeah, they really were drinking then.
Yeah.
Heavily.
What year was this?
Oh, man, this is when I had short hair. I mean, we're talking 2007, 2008.
Okay. Yeah, you said pre-podcast, so
yeah.
I was thinking like maybe early mid-2000s.
Oh yeah, this was a long time ago. But these dudes, they flipped it on me so hard. But it was a dope episode. I got to ask them things about themselves, which I guess that's why they flipped it like that. But
yeah, there's a podcast right now. I want to say it's called The Drinking Bros, where it's like four guys that sit around. They talk just a whole bunch of just random current topics, and they're just drinking. That's all they do.
It's like drunk history, but people talking. Yeah. I remember that morning I went home and took a nap because I was just like, I'm lit up and I haven't had any breakfast. That's what Sam asked me for my mic check. What was your breakfast? So
you have breakfast today?
I had a smoothie, which is my breakfast, but I usually try to eat a little snack around this hour. Because I usually eat late lunches, and then I may or may not eat dinner, depending on how heavy my lunch is. I mean, it's, food. I usually have, I only usually eat dinner if a friend is cooking. I'm not that skilled in the kitchen, but I have friends who are gracious.
So at least this beer is not going to be super strong this morning. So I want to just quickly, before we get into it, give a shout out to East Brother Beer Company for being our sponsor and supplying the beer. And this is their oatmeal stout. So you say you're not a fan of stouts, but what do you think of this oatmeal stout?
This is tasty.
It's tasty, right?
Yeah, this is tasty. I could sit on this for a minute. Yeah.
Yeah. That's the thing about this stout is I know quite a few people that are not into stouts because it tends to be a very heavy, dark beer. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people that don't like stouts, I know, like East Brothers Oatmeal Stout because it's a lot lighter, it's tastier.
Mm-hmm. And I've liked oatmeal stouts before. I just can't. I've tried stouts before. I haven't had a glass of Guinness before. I mean, it's just too
heavy.
It's just too much. But Guinness
is my favorite beer. I love it.
Really?
It's like water to me.
Oh, man, I can't. But this right here, this is. I want to feel this one.
Sam, being that you brought up Guinness, apparently the Guinness here in America is way different from the Guinness in Ireland.
That's what I've heard. I've heard rumors that it's not. It's also the same. I don't know. But it's definitely on my list of things to get out to Ireland and
we'll have to buy a can and have it shipped over here
or something like that. Yeah, might be more fun just to go there.
Yeah. I think that would be the trip to do. And then I mean, there's a reason you like Guinness, and you can do it to taste the Guinness.
Yeah.
I support that, Sam.
So, so one thing I like to ask many of the podcast guests is, what has your attention right now? What's got your attention? It could be politics right now. It could be maybe the wildfires. It could be something, a movie, a book,
Hmm.
a music. What has your attention?
That's a good question because my attention shifts weekly. I mean, and not necessarily with the news cycles. It's just the people I meet. But right now, I'm intensely and intently focused on housing in the Bay Area, particularly because of the campfire. The air quality is rather unhealthy. I mean, there's hazardous conditions right now in the Bay Area, and
It was 238 in Richmond the other day.
yeah, I mean that's so. You and I have the ability to stay indoors according to the air alerts. We can stay indoors, shut our windows, but there are people without homes who don't have that option, and I'm focused on those persons because um, I always concentrate on helping others, and I feel that cities in the Bay Area who didn't even have a plan to hand out masks to people on the street,
Mm.
and there it just seems like um, people without homes are being criminalized in Bay Area cities, even though courts have ruled that it's unconstitutional um, to fine a person who doesn't have a home. And actually, in uh, district court in Northern California, just ruled recently, as last month, that you couldn't fine or towing a person's car because they had unpaid parking tickets, which they could not pay, was unconstitutional because it provides an undue hardship on that person.
Hmm.
And I wonder when our city government and city governments in the Bay Area are going to catch up to courts, or just catch up to doing the decent thing for folks. And so I've been spending a lot of time the last week and a half or so out at homeless camps, because you go there, you see the need is greater than a mask. It's much more than that. I mean, you need food, you need toiletries, you need toilets, you need showers. Um, the option to go get a minimum wage job is not going to solve their issue, short term or long term. I mean, the cost of living in the Bay Area is ridiculous right now.
Yeah, and even if you get a job, it takes 2 weeks before you get your first paycheck.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes a full 4 weeks if you get paid once a month.
Yeah. And then that paycheck, if you're working, say, a minimum wage job, which there are some people, and by people I mean readers, who will lash out to me or lash out at me for covering, the marginalized, the underserved, the downtrodden. They'll say, well, they could go get a job. McDonald's is always hiring. But like you said, so if you wait 2 weeks or you wait a month to get that first paycheck is not going to afford you to put a deposit, first month's rent, last month's rent on an apartment in the Bay Area. And that's many of these places require that, but they also require a background check, a credit check. So if you have any strikes against you, like a prior conviction or poor credit, you're not going to get that home anyway, even with a paycheck. So I think it's much more nuanced than that. And so when I say housing, it's all encompassing. It's actually getting a housing. It's, the people who have jobs who can't afford to live here. Many people are, a paycheck or two away, a lost job or an illness in a family or an unexpected expense away from joining many of these people on the streets.
Yeah, there was a very interesting study that just came out, I want to say maybe a month or two ago, where they asked, what's the percentage of Americans that can give you $300 right now on the spot if you ask them for the 300? And I want to say it was something crazy like 60 or 70% could not. And that also includes credit card usage.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is
That's
wow.
scary, right?
I didn't know that, but a long years ago, I was doing a story on the estate of James Brown. Now, James Brown, Godfather of Soul, shout out to him for laying the template for hip hop. But this man did so much for music and has inspired so many folks, like just the drum beats on his records. But his family members at the time of his death couldn't afford $1,000 just to put a retainer down on a lawyer. And one of his lawyers told me that, you have so many people, even if they're in like the proximity of wealth, that don't have it. So you think this man, legendary, that his family members would trickle down, but it doesn't. And I'm thinking about people in Oakland who had their trailers towed a couple weeks ago. They don't have the $500, $600 to pay the cost to get it out of the tow yard. And then you compound that with the city wanting them to pay unpaid parking tickets. And then you want them to register their vehicles, which they didn't have the money for. So you're talking about over $1,000. Easy. And you're right. People just don't have that kind of cash. And, we're talking about saving for retirement. We're talking about rainy day funds. Well, people don't even have enough to eat. And I think it's incumbent upon myself to shine a light on those kind of stories because, we all have issues. We all have problems. But there are some people who, no matter what they do, without some sort of assistance, they're never going to get a leg up.
So how do you convey that story to readers, both print and online, that are a bit or more wealthier, to where many people, their natural response is, well, they should save up some money. That's very easy to say, right?
Yeah.
So how do you convey these stories to kind of get it across to them that, hey, it's not as easy as saving up money?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially when you're making money as odd jobs or panhandling. What I try to do is I try to humanize. I try to present human portraits. So when you think about homelessness in the Bay Area, you think about tents, you think about garbage piled up, you think about hoarders. You see the images that people post on social media, that news organizations post, and to me, it desensitizes people. You just see the stuff around them. You see the grit and your grime, but you don't get to know the actual people who are living that life. And I think when it's desensitized, we can keep it at arm's length and say, oh, those people, or that's what's happened. So what I try to do is to find folks and let them tell their story in my column and show that they're just like you and me. Like if our circumstances are just a little bit different than we could be in that position. And when you don't have the legacy of parents who've gone to college and worked good jobs, and their parents went to college and worked jobs, and their parents went to college and worked jobs, when you don't have that legacy, then I try to show people that without that legacy of two-parent income, households, then you're not probably going to have the same outcome as those people who come from those households. And I try to show people who, no matter what their situation is, I mean, there are people who live in tents who are drug addicts, who are alcoholics. But there's people who live in mansions who are drug addicts and alcoholics. But there's also people who live in tents who understand that the situation that they find themselves in is in many ways unfair, especially when we live in a state which has the fifth largest economy in the world. Like, how is that possible? How is it possible that we have all this wealth,
yet we have the #1 highest homelessness rate?
Yeah, how is that? I mean, I've heard wealthy folks tell me, "Oh, well, it's because our climate. They come here because we give you everything for free." Come with me to a homeless camp, which before I came up here, I was out at an RV camp in West Oakland where these people don't get anything for free. Yeah, someone might stop by with some donuts or some clothes, but when that sun goes down and it gets cold, I mean, they have to worry about how they're going to keep warm for a night, and it's not even raining yet. It's not even in our winter season yet. I I think it's my duty to show these people in a humanizing light.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that that becomes a very tricky thing in journalism. How do you do that, right? But you have to tell a story because for many people, they only know what they know.
Mhm.
We've had the Rice Center and Richmond College Prep here on the show before, and they focus around helping the local community in Richmond and helping a lot of youths that get stuck in that same pattern of, well, my father or my mother, my uncle, they're in
Mhm.
prison. This is the only life that I know. And
Mhm.
so these organizations spend so much time and money helping the community and local youths to say, wait a minute, you have options. There's a
Mhm.
lot of options out there, and here's what we can show you.
Mhm.
And then that opens up their mind, right? And so for many people, it's you said something where they grow up with, their parents having jobs and then their
Mhm.
grandparents had jobs, and
Mhm.
it just, they just follow along that same path, right?
Mhm.
And so to explain to them that there's more to the world than just what they know. I guess that's the tricky part to journalism, right?
Yeah, well, especially for marginalized youth, um, everywhere in the Bay Area. Um, I went one morning, I believe it was last year, um, for Richmond, which is a nonprofit in Richmond, was flying these youth to Los Angeles. Um, m- I think to a person, none of these children had been on a flight before, and you could see it in their faces and their body language how nervous they were. But it was important for Richmond at the time to show them that, hey, you can take a plane to somewhere else and see these things. Imagine if this was a part of your life, a daily part of your life, of exploring your surroundings outside of your neighborhood, which is really reduced to from your school to the complex where you live in. So many children grow up with that, and so when people demean them for not having high scholastic achievement, well, I mean, you've got poor schools. And then you demean them for not wanting to go to college. Well, if no one in your family went to college, why would you have the expectation to go to college? And then they demean them for not going out and getting a high paying job that can afford to live in the Bay Area. Well, without the college skills, you can't get that high paying job. And I just feel that so it's twofold. There's one, showing the people who are actually living through hardships to more affluent readers, but then number two, it's writing the stories about the youth and how their lives are impacted by certain policies that are made by the affluent. And so, yeah, if it comes to for me, my coverage line is, you could do top down, which is government officials, people with influence, or you can do bottom up, which is the people who are literally at the bottom and telling their stories. I'm always going to go from the bottom up because I think that's where, the real news is. That's where people are actually through the living with the effects of our policymakers. And right now, it's housing where our policymakers are. We're going to do this, but it's going to take us a couple of months. And in the meantime, these folks on the street are living in limbo, and they don't know. They need some respite now, not in 6 months. I mean, actually, they need it 6 months ago. So
Hmm.
uh, it's really a it's really a point that I made when I joined the Chronicle was that I want to tell these stories. I want to deal with these people that are, as we say, in the mud. I want to be down there. I don't. Shout out to City Hall and all those places, but I'm getting spun up there. People down in the mud, they're giving it to you real, because every day they're just trying to hold on for one more day. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine just waking up and not knowing where your next meal is coming from? That's adults to children deal with that every single day. And that has to be known, because it's not a game out there. It's not a game with people who are, I don't know. I don't know what I'm going to eat. And then when you go and tow their RV with, I met with a dude yesterday outside this park in West Oakland, where his Social Security, his California ID, all of that's in the truck. So guess what? You tell him to go get a job? Well, can I get into this tow yard where my RV is? Oh, no? Well, then guess what? How am I going to get a job when I don't have these things that I can't even ID myself? And guess what? Chances are he probably will. I don't want to say he probably will. What happens if he has an interaction with a police officer who asks for his ID? Then he's in the system. It's these sort of things that where the city penalizes people for being poor. And I say city, I mean cities penalize people for being poor. It's got to stop. At some point, I have to say, okay, it is not criminal. And that's what courts have said. It's not criminal to be poor. And if you don't have a home, you're living out of your car, that's not enough to tow your car or throw you in jail. That's not vagrancy. That's a fact of life.
Yeah, the cash bail bond system has made news lately because of that same thing, where it really just feeds on people that don't have the money to, post bail, especially when there's very, very small crimes, misdemeanors that, if you have a little bit of money, you're able to post bail and walk free.
Yeah, you can walk free, but there's people who sit in jail for months to years waiting for a court date. So say if someone gets arrested and they're working a minimum wage job or low paying job, they lose that job. So now you've hit them with 2 strikes. And for what? So taxpayers can pay for them to stay in, and I'm sorry, the prison system doesn't reform people. So you want them to stay in jail, and so what? So we can have a court date that may or may not come up on the docket in a couple of months. I don't think that's fair. And again, that penalizes people for being poor. And what you're doing is you're keeping them from any type of upward mobility with the cash bail system, with various infractions. We could get into policing too, how police patrol of poor or poorer neighborhoods where you're more than likely can find someone on doing something illegal. Police are still arresting people for holding marijuana. It's legal, right? But you're because this person doesn't have a card or can't identify where they purchased this marijuana,
or you're standing on city property.
Mm-hmm. So, it's police have a lot of discretion, but again, I think poor people are being criminalized simply for being poor, and at some point, we as a society have to say that's just not right.
Well, Governor Brown signed in the bill to abolish the cash bail bond system as of, I think, October next year, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, but it's 10 months. So what damage is going to be done in 10 months to people who, and again, that affects marginalized communities of color, and how many of those folks, because they have to deal with the system in that way, are not going to be able to maintain a foothold in the Bay Area. I think that's when we discuss gentrification, we're not talking about how the costs of being poor are compounded by criminalizing people for simply being poor. I know I sound like a a record on skip, or what is it, broken record on repeat? Yeah, but I mean, again, that's my job to reinforce that these things are happening, and it's and because you can live in a community that's far away from this happening doesn't mean you're absolved for it. We all vote for the same people. I mean, we voted for a governor as a state, and cities of Richmond voted for a mayor. Oakland voted for a mayor. I mean, we have to hold people accountable, because I feel that if the people who have the least among us, if they're doing a little bit better, then we're all doing a little bit better. I mean, our streets are safer, they're cleaner.
Well, it's like in sports, you're only as good as your weakest link. Right?
Yes, exactly.
It's the same thing.
And I mean, you want to deal with a homelessness issue? Well, yeah, demand that the city open up these RV lots. They open up more tiny housing lots. Like, they do more of this.
What I would like to see are the abandoned commercial buildings put to use, because there's like the commercial market. I'm in real estate, so the commercial market I know has taken a bit of a dive in the retail sector, right? People are going to Amazon, they're shopping online. So a lot of these abandoned retail centers can be put to use with the city coming in. I mean, the owners are not making any money off of it. It's abandoned.
Yeah, that's true. There's I've thought about that before. For instance, in San Leandro, there's a Walmart that is empty. The building's empty. Like, why not retrofit that in some way and have people move in there? Actually, it's not in San Leandro. It's in East Oakland. Sorry about that, San Leandro. But you're right there, and I wonder about these mixed use spaces that are coming online. There's tons of them being built in Oakland, where there's retail on the bottom floor.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder how sustainable that is.
So it's actually a great sustainable model, because the retail survives from the residents on top, right?
Okay.
And so if you have enough residents, the trend is going toward communities where you don't have to own a car, right? There's still parking guidelines, but it's amazing because I'll do property management in San Pablo, Richmond, and everyone has a car. Property management in Oakland, Berkeley, maybe half the people have a car. And so there's a big push toward developments, complexes, communities where you can access things without having a need for a car. Hilltop Mall, they're getting ready to, in fact, I believe they're already in the process of remodeling the mall, but the idea is to build 3,000 to 5,000 units around the mall. Now, what are they going to do with the mall? The people that bought it and are flipping it said, we know a mall cannot survive on selling clothing anymore. That's 1980s, 1990. Today, it has to survive around services. So you build the 3,000 to 5,000 units, and you provide all the services that they need. So Kaiser's building, Kaiser's going to have 2 buildings there: a movie theater, optometrists, dentists, doctors, restaurants, gym. So you create everything within the mall.
Grocery store?
Grocery store, yeah.
Okay.
So you create everything inside of this mall, and then you have all the residential housing around it. So that's the idea behind.
Now, who can afford to live there, though?
Well, that's very interesting, because there was a study. Sam, what was the study that we just covered regarding the affordability, where San Francisco was rated the number 2 most affordable city in the nation, because what they did is they looked at what household incomes make compared to what's the percentage of housing that they can truly afford in the city. And San Francisco, surprisingly, came in at number 2, with most households being able to afford 67%.
It was a Rent Cafe study.
Rent Cafe.
Okay.
So 67%, San Francisco households, their average median income can afford approximately 67% of the housing stock on the market. So that's how they judged affordability. And I forgot who was number 1. Was it Atlanta that was number 1? But it was Atlanta. I'm pretty sure it was Atlanta, but San Francisco was number 2. LA was like number 8 on affordability. So it's a very different measurement, because You have studies that show the issue with affordability.
Mm-hmm.
But then if you look at the median income in the Bay Area, and right now in the Bay Area, it's 110,000 household income,
Mm-hmm.
right? Obviously, that's not everyone,
That's
but
definitely not everyone.
exactly,
Yeah.
right? But it's also tracking household income. Now, how can household income go up when maybe certain salaries don't go up? And the simple answer is people move in together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, people are having to. But then these apartments that you're talking about, Hilltop. So I imagine these are 1, 2, and 3 bedroom apartments.
I would imagine they haven't released the makeout, and
Okay.
my understanding is they're going to entitle these projects and then sell them individually, like 300 to 500 units to developers. That's how most developments happen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
So we're still a ways away
we're
from.
still a ways away. Yeah,
Yeah, that's. There needs to be more housing built, but
yeah.
more.
Again, you're 2, 3, maybe 4 years away from all that being 100% done.
We need more affordable housing too, and by affordable I mean, your 1 bedroom is not market rate. Market rate is not affordable for many people. Like your 2 bedroom at like 3,800 is not affordable for. I mean, the people that I get to know. Definitely not affordable because the salaries don't match up to what is necessary. And then, when people are spending, over what is it, 40% of their take home on housing, I mean, that money goes fast.
Yeah, you see that even on the home purchase side.
Yeah.
You see banks typically, like if you're going to buy a home,
Mhm.
healthy 30 to 35% max of your
Oh.
take home toward mortgage. But the problem is they will go up to 45, sometimes in some cases 50% of your gross income, which is not even take home, right?
Yeah, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, before the market crash, there were some people doing up to 55%
Of their gross?
of their gross. And that's just not healthy finances right there. That's just being set up.
Mhm.
I mean, and so if you look at what happened with home ownership, where people were at 45, 50, 55% of their gross take home,
Mhm.
and then if you look at rentals and you're seeing the same thing in some areas, that's not healthy either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, people are getting hit hard.
And really the affordability really comes down to supply. Well, how do we build more? How do we get more supply out there? And unfortunately, the problem is to build more, it takes years,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's not complicated. Gavin Newsom wants to build 500,000 units per year, but we're only building 80,000 right now. How are we going to jump up to 500,000?
Mm-hmm. And where is it going to be too? That's what I wanted to know from his campaign. Like, where do you suggest the housing be built?
Yeah, and it's funny because we do have the land. So you could pick anywhere and build it. Does it make sense and will people really move there? That's a different story, and the answer is no.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have to build where people want to live and where people work.
Yeah, that's
right?
where I want to see what happens with Oakland once all these housing units come online. Back to the apartments and the retail space. I want to see if those retail spaces are filled. There's in my neighborhood, there's they built, I don't know how many units it was, but they built a complex for seniors. And across the street, they're building a complex for just anyone, but they have the retail spaces at the bottom. Now, the senior living place, no one's taken over that retail space. The one across the street, I'm really curious to see what comes there because the neighborhood has grocery stores. Again, that's another thing about neighborhoods that I've noticed. The lack of resources in some neighborhoods. It's really astounding to me. I mean, West Oakland doesn't have a grocery store. How do you not have a grocery store in a neighborhood that long? But we're talking about this place, Hilltop, where they'll have a some sort of store, I'm sure. Yeah, even if it's a small boutique store where you can go get your milk and your coffee and your bananas.
Do you watch Adam Ruins Everything, or have you seen that segment before on YouTube?
I've seen a video on YouTube. Isn't it a television show? Is it on?
So now they have it on Netflix.
Okay.
And they're longer 30-minute segments, but it started off, I want to say, Comedy Humor, the channel, or
College humor.
College Humor. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe that's where I've seen. I mean, I've seen a video of
Yeah. So it started on College Humor, and he did small little segments of just Adam Ruins Everything, and they're great, interesting segments because they break down the history of why we do certain things in society. Well, on the Netflix special, he breaks a segment down of vehicles, of cars, and how it's really a financial pit for most Americans, and how we really messed up the infrastructure years ago by focusing on cars because people were getting cars. People could then plant stores like miles apart. And now we've built a society infrastructure that really depends on vehicles, yet vehicles are a huge, huge financial burden for so many people. You have your car payment, you have insurance, you have to have a driver license, you have to get it smogged, you have to
register it.
register it.
Yes,
Then any repairs, you're responsible for repairs.
Tires. Yeah, you're right. And then we're hard on our cars too, especially if you're doing Bay Area driving. You know what? So where I moved out here from, South Carolina, it was like that where you needed to have a car because the neighborhoods just weren't, especially the suburbs, just weren't built around, hey, I need to walk to the grocery store. It's like, no, you need to get in the car to drive 5 minutes to the grocery store. But within a year, less than a year of living out here, I had to replace a clutch, which is, I don't know, it was something like $1,100 or something. I obliterated this clutch. And I'm just thinking, like, if I wasn't working at the time where I was making really good money at a tech job, then that would have been burdensome on me. But you're right. Just imagine someone who doesn't have $1,000 just sitting in a checking account. And what do you do? That car sits there and you're trying to, and then you go buy another car, this junker, just so you can get through the weeks.
And then that'll last you maybe a couple months, and then you're back to needing another car. And so, he broke down the infrastructure and how we've relied so much on a vehicle, on this big financial burden for most people, and the entire conclusion of it all is we need to go back to building infrastructure to where people don't need vehicles, where people can live and work in the same area or easily get around. And you're starting to see some cities in Europe trying to focus their policies around that. I believe the new mayor of Paris wants to eliminate vehicles 100%. So they're trying to change policy and dump a lot of money into building the subway systems and public transportation to where you don't need to own a car anymore in Paris. Now, Paris is pretty big. How they're going to do that, different story. But there are a few cities right now in Europe that already have done that, and people are able to thrive.
I want that. I make a conscientious effort to drive my car less. I bike, I walk. Although, with the campfire, I've been staying inside a lot more. And that's also I feel healthier when I bike and walk instead of jumping in the car. I did drive up here though. I was like, what, public transportation, I think that needs to be improved too. BART it's hard to stomach between 8 and 10 o'clock in the morning. That it is.
Have you ridden on the new BART trains yet?
Yeah, I rode on, but again, so it's not on my line, but I just happened to be in Berkeley, and I was heading from Berkeley to downtown Oakland, and I rode a new train. They're nice. Their seats are comfortable. I could see it. The newness I think it will, have people want to keep it clean, but it's much more space than what they have now. But then also, it shows you where your station is. The signage is so much more clear, and then audio communication between the conductor and the cars is much better too. It was kind of hard going back to the original cars, that's for sure. But yeah, we need more trains. But if you notice, they really don't go anywhere, Bart. It's it's almost like just across.
Yeah.
Like that's just not.
It's like a reversed H, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Okay. So down and then it goes out here. Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's like cross X and then the H is here, but it's not. I mean, you can't get it to San Francisco anywhere in San Francisco, really on BART. I mean, you try to go up to Golden Gate. I mean, you got to deal with Muni then, and that's.
It's more just it gets you to work. I guess that's about it, or to the airport. But it's
Yeah.
very limited in a sense.
The one time I went to Rome, I was really impressed with their subway system. It costs 25 cents to ride anywhere. They didn't charge you based on your distance.
Yeah, meter.
25 cents, you're in there, you ride anywhere you want. But there's so many stations and so many breaking points to their track. You could literally go anywhere in that city. I mean, it would be like hopping onto BART and 5 minutes later, you're at Golden Gate Park, right?
See, that's
Or then if you wanted to go to South City, you can be there within 5 minutes.
that's how it should be. I mean, I don't know. I didn't take the New York model, but other cities that have grown exponentially in the last like 15 years, like Atlanta, they don't have quality public transportation as far as the train. Los Angeles, man.
Yeah, and one of the problems is then you rely on buses for public transportation, but then you're going back to that vehicle, right? And you're going back to, well, buses are expensive. Then the cost of gas is really expensive because they take up a lot more. They don't travel as fast. And then now the city has a lot of expenses, right? Now I am curious to see how Tesla's electric buses, when they come out, if cities are going to really adopt those. But then you're spending a lot of money on electricity and the batteries and
then it's conceptual, but is it really going to work? Are cities going to buy in? Cities are really slow. Bureaucracy really slows down a lot of things. That's something I want to look more into, transportation in 2019. I mean, I did a little bit this year because I was really kind of irked that all the bike sharing wasn't going into low income neighborhoods. Like they weren't giving people the access that they needed to the options of the bike share. And for instance, Ford started their Go Bike campaign, and it started in like the tip of North Oakland and just edged ever so slightly into East Oakland. It's like, well, I understand that you do have the ability, or you are offering reduced prices to low income people, but those low income people have to get to a place to access that, and that's cumbersome for a lot of people. That's another ways where if we put the grocery store in a low income neighborhood, I think people would be healthier or have more options.
And I think that's where the policy for every local government has to change and adapt to. It's you need to focus on building what people need in the same communities where they live.
I'm really excited about District 6 in Oakland, which was a city council race I followed closely this last cycle. I felt that the incumbent had been there for 16 years and the district hadn't changed much. And in many ways, it got worse. So you take a city like Oakland where there's all this development. You look around, there's cranes everywhere in West Oakland and downtown Oakland and even parts of North Oakland. But East Oakland, specifically in the flatlands, it's almost barren. There are no grocery stores. There's no banks, but there's plenty of liquor stores. There's plenty of check cashing places. What happens when you give a community that something that yearns for, like more than one grocery store? They actually did. We were talking about earlier with Hilltop. This mall. They actually repurposed that and have a grocery store in the mall now, and they put some like community services in there, which was a smart move. But the community needs more, especially for the people who are trying to maintain a foothold. As more and more people buy land in East Oakland because it's affordable comparative to North Oakland.
Yeah, I think, and going back to the homelessness problem, or the homeless problem, is if cities acted like the spirit store does exactly what cities need to do. I mean, the spirit store finds abandoned retail centers, and they find these abandoned stores, and they lease them short term. They sell every holiday, and then they're out. That's exactly what cities need to do. Locate where, and they know where they are because they're not getting taxes from them. Just locate where they're located, and then turn those, even if it's temporary, because if maybe there is going to be a permanent business, well, there's another retail store where most likely that business is moving from, or there's enough time in advance to where you can move these different centers.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that would be a start, just to open these up to the homeless people, to give them at least some shelter.
I wish cities, they're already landlords in many senses with Section 8 housing. I think they need to think about purchasing buildings and turning those into centers, transitional housing, because they have the ability to, and many cities own land. So, I mean, they could build on there, partnership with the developer looking to.
Yeah, and the city wouldn't have to spend, like what you said. Well, why don't they just buy the buildings? Well, right away, that popped into my mind is, well, they don't have the money to buy the buildings, but there are a lot of developers that will donate a big percentage or even the entire building to the city for the tax benefits.
They could definitely. There is, if you wanted to do that, it could get done. Whether it's the city works out like a deferred payment plan, or whether you work out to where, folks give you a percentage of their earnings after, you help them you get them out of transitional housing, they find a job. I mean, there's small programs like that happening now where people, for instance, I was hanging out with a Berkeley couple that moved into Berkeley's first navigation center. And then they were there, I think, for 2 months. And then they were able to, actually 3 months, and then they were able to get housing based on the woman. She was able to, she finally was granted her Social Security income, SSI payments. And, but it's going to be a while until she gets that. So, but she was able to get into the apartment, which is like $1,600 a month. And they are going to, they're going to take out the rent that the county has already paid out of her check, but do it in small increments. So it's not going to hurt her, but she is going to pay back. I think a city can make deal like that because, the cities, they can get credit. Especially when, especially cities where you have this new taxable income or from these marijuana businesses moving on. I think that I wish cities were thinking smarter about what taxes from cannabis can do for cities and how that can trickle down and actually help people who need it the most.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Yeah, the problem that you see with Section 8 or some other programs, like Shelter Inc. is another one that's that's grown up.
Yeah.
They've grown up to be, I think, a big powerhouse, very similar to Section 8. The problem, though, is you're talking about HUD funds. And when HUD gets a funding cut from the tax reform, that makes its way out to every department. And not every department is managed as well as the next. Right?
You're being politically correct right now.
Yes. And so the problem that we see is, like, I can look at different agencies because being in property management, we deal with Section 8 housing all the time. And I can see the well-run organizations, and then I can see the ones that are poorly ran where you could really tell, with the budget cut, they got hit pretty hard. And they're now close to impossible to even work with because they're understaffed. And then that's
not good.
That's not good because then what happens is you have a homeowner that wants to rent out the property to a Section 8 person, everything is approved, but it's taking Section 8 3, 4, maybe 5 months just to get us the paperwork.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
So, yes, that's ridiculous. I'm glad you pointed that out because Oakland now has put together in its housing department a way to expedite that process because I didn't know it would take HUD that long agency to get around to giving you the paperwork approving the place and then it's months after for you to move someone in. So why would you as a property owner even want to deal with that headache when you can just get above market rate or in some cases and have someone in there?
correct. And one of the issues I saw with Richmond Housing Authority years ago was they never raised their cap limits to keep up with market rents. So for a 2-bedroom, it was like $1,850 was a cap.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if 2 bedrooms are going for $2,000, $2,200, no landlord is going to take Section 8 when they can get $400 more.
Exactly.
They eventually raised it, but it took them years. Contra Costa was ahead of the game. So if you were a tenant and you wanted, let's say, a 2-bedroom house, your chances were better in San Pablo and porting your voucher from Richmond to Contra Costa County than to stay in Richmond.
Wow.
So it's a lot more complicated than, right? It's once you start diving deep into a subject, you start learning all these different little intricate workings and what's really going on. But yeah, I mean, you need more funding from HUD, and then you also need these organizations to get a lot more organized in their financing and accounting, and just simply, it shouldn't take 4 to 5 months to get paperwork to a landlord to finalize, because that's 4 or 5 months where a landlord may say, hey, I'm going to rent to someone else who can rent out the property now.
Well,
and then that person who needs the help just lost out.
Well, if you're thinking that that place is anywhere from $1,500, so let's say $2,000, let's go with the median. That's $8K that the landlord is missing out for 4 months waiting on the government to do its job to help this person who's like, I can't pay all of that. I can pay some of that.
Now, I'll tell you now that Contra Costa Housing is on top of it. They're good. Berkeley and Oakland are really good to work with. Yeah. In fact, the one thing I like about Oakland Housing Authority is that they're constantly trying to improve and change things to make themselves more appealing to landlords.
Oh, well, that's what I'm saying. They expedited the Section 8 process now. They saw an issue. And then also, if you are a Section 8 tenant and you moved out of my place, the city is going to pay me to keep it open for a Section 8 tenant. And that's so that I'm not losing the vacancy. What's it called? I forget. Vacancy tax. Yeah.
Yeah. That's a new policy that they started January of this year.
Yeah. That's legitimate. Yeah. I mean, I think that helps. I also like going to housing. The city of Oakland, they're using HUD funds no, that's something different. The HUD funds are going to be used to open up more transitional housing areas, but they went out and got money from Kaiser and the San Francisco Foundation to say if I were about to be evicted because I haven't paid a month or two of rent, where I can go to the city and be like, hey, this is where I'm having trouble. Here's the documents. I'm about to be evicted. If I don't pay this much, the city's going to go and pay that for people, which is incredible. I think the city should be lauded for that. But of course, me being me, I want more. I mean, I want to expedite the safe parking zones for RVs, or just say this zone is off limits. Let me pay if I feel the city, if it really cares about the homeless residents, if people are parked in, say, an area where a developer is, getting upset about it, the city just say, here, I kick you X amount of dollars until, let's work out a deal, because we all want the same things. Like the developer wants to be in Oakland. They want to prosper, and the city wants to prosper with this developer because it's taxable, right? But then it also wants the less fortunate to prosper. There's money. I mean, yeah, you're like, well, how do you budget? How do you finance? But I think that goes a long way And I think it has an effect on your constituency when you show that, like, I'm doing it for humanity, not just for political gain or because I've been lobbied this way. If our leaders were like, I'm doing this because this is the best outcome for these people who have less than I do, I would
Yeah,
like to see more of that.
Yeah, it's one of those things where we as a society need to get away from just always thinking about, well, what's good for me? What's good for
Hmm.
what I want, right?
Hmm.
And we really just need to take a step back and say, well, what's good for the less fortunate? Because again, we're only as good as our weakest link. And if
Yeah.
we can help them out to
Hmm.
even some small degree,
Hmm.
well, that just makes everything that much better.
Well, you go into the sports analogy again. When a team, say a baseball team, is going to playoffs and they're deficient in starting pitching, what do they do at the trade deadline? They try to find starting pitching. If a football team is, their offense is cooking, their defense is cooking, but they give a lot of passing yards, what do they try to do? They try to find a defensive back. So we're a society where our top half is doing well. Our property values are way up. Some neighborhoods in Bay Area cities have a lot of amenities and resources, but then there's also the people who don't have anything. Well, so instead of looking at it as a nuisance, well, what can I do to make sure that so we all as a whole are better?
Mhm.
And I don't think we're quite there yet, because here we are the week of Thanksgiving, and you've got people in the RV community who are worried about getting towed right now. And it's the week of things. Why? Well, why now? There's dozens of other things we can be doing. But if the city is serious about, and this is Oakland again, if the Oakland is serious about helping the less fortunate, it would step in. I have not seen one city official, and I've spent like 2 days there now, those last 2 days, last night, yesterday afternoon, yesterday night, and this morning, and I haven't seen a city official there. I think it's time that cities that have homeless issues or housing issues where people are living on the streets, that they need to hire someone who focuses just on that, who can mediate and mitigate a lot of these issues that crop up, because you just can't. I don't think in good conscience you can tow these folks and then still say, oh, we're here for the people, because that is not the case.
Yeah. Well, with that, that's our time. And Otis, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I could talk to you forever about this
Oh,
stuff.
yeah,
And
this is good.
we didn't even get into half of the outline that we originally had. So we'll have to do this again.
Yeah, I'll
another
come
time
back.
soon.
I'll come
Yeah.
back and chill. Sorry if I went off on.
No. It's great stuff. And it's stuff that people need to talk about and people need to hear, right?
Mhm.
And again, the more you, myself, and the more we make people aware of certain things that are really going on with our community,
Mhm.
the pluses and the minuses, right?
Yes.
And then the more we discuss and debate it, that's where change begins to happen.
I agree with you.
I think this was
Thank
a
you.
great episode, and again, thanks to East Brother Beer, our sponsors.
Yeah, it was
and
tasty, yo. I'm feeling that oatmeal stout. Yeah. Yeah.
It grows on you for sure.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but thanks for having me. I appreciate any opportunity to talk about things that I care about, and I hope some of your listeners check it out. And please check out the San Francisco Chronicle. My columns in the paper Mondays and Thursdays, also online, and we're doing good work. So please take a look at us.
Great.
All right, cool. Yeah, this.
Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. Thank you to our producer, Sam Lubin. Please subscribe, like, comment, and share the podcast. Remember, you can listen to the podcast on iTunes, Podbean, iHeartRadio, Google Play, SoundCloud, and anywhere else you listen to podcasts. For more information on my business as a property manager and real estate team, go visit my website at marcguzman.com. I really want to thank all of you for listening. It means the world to me, and I hope today's episode provides you value in your day-to-day life. I created this podcast to help showcase the many great people that live in this world and help share some knowledge that I've learned along the way in life. Again, thank you for listening. Check out our sponsors, and I'll catch you on the next episode.